If there's one thing that can be said about 80s pop culture is that it has affected the mainstream of the 21st century in ways that one cannot possibly imagine. Transformers, Thundercats, My Little Pony, even the Care Bears are just a few examples of the mainstream kids culture of the day that successfully imprinted themselves onto the kids of today. What makes the 80s such a big thing for remakes, reinvention or even redux? Well, for a child of the 80s, let me say this, it was quite an interesting time for us. Let's put aside the cartoons we watched, the toys we played with, and even the trading cards we used to trade just for the sake of completion. Back then, the internet was the purview of the rich, the wealthy, and a few nerds who understood how to work a simple 8-bit message board on a green and black screen. Whilst the seeds were being sown for something far greater, we were still walking across the road to knock on the door on our friends to see if they would come out to play, climbing trees on a daily basis, and it was a time when community still actually meant seeing someone face to face, in person. The 90s was just around the corner, and the internet highway was only just in its diapers. Think about that for a minute. The 80s were the breeding ground of a generation that would be the first to experience the internet and eventually take advantage of it. The world was becoming smaller, and thus what we enjoyed as children could be looked upon fondly with the passion we shared for it at the time, with multiple websites, communities and forums. Such interests were no longer studies for the history books, but they were constant updates and real-time experience that endured to the 21st century. For the first time, it was easier for our children to appreciate what we enjoyed and why we enjoyed it when we were their age, and they were living it. I can't think of an age that has such an impact on a different age. The 60s, I suppose, but I feel that's more of a nostalgic thing than anything else. With the 80s, however, it almost feels like the decade refuses to die, long after its sell-by date.
So how well does the 80s fare in the 21st century? Well, if we were to look at Hollywood, not very well at all in the grand scheme of storytelling, but in the box office, well, Transformers speaks for itself. Unfortunately, in the cinema, Transformers has, well, let's just say, related itself to the lowest common denominator. But that it's a box office success can be of no denial. G.I. Joe, on the other hand, has had two major flops. Dwayne Johnson, i.e. The Rock from WWE, not being able to save the franchise from its ultimate self-destruction in Hollywood. That said, on television, however, the 80s has actually recovered a great deal. Transformers Prime, My Little Pony has seen a major reinvention, and G.I. Joe continues to be as popular as it was back in the day before the 1980s. In fact, G.I. Joe was actually considered to be one of the most violent resolutions ever brought about for an 80s TV show. G.I. Joe Resolution presented us with the death of major characters from the original 1980s version of G.I. Joe, plus a darker, much violent and, strangely enough, more courageous Cobra Commander than originally portrayed in the original series. Transformers Prime is most definitely a darker incarnation of its previous series, but on top of that, it is welcome to see the return of Peter Cullen and Frank Welker playing old enemies as Megatron and Optimus Prime once again. However, to be honest, I do still find the childishness of Bumblebee not being able to talk to be somewhat, well, frankly annoying.
Oh, for Primate's sake! Will someone keep him occupied so I can get some work done?
However, it's worthy of note that these are not the Transformers, the Care Bears, the My Little Ponies, or even the G.I. Joes of my day or generation. An adaptation to the modern age is and continues to be a must, and yet they somehow manage to maintain the spirit of the original incarnations. It's better to look upon these new incarnations as nods to their, well, let's be honest here, more cheesy incarnations. That's not to say that the new G.I. Joe series is an improvement on the old. In fact, in my opinion, it's very lacklustre in comparison to G.I. Joe Resolute, which was more of a continuation of the original series than a reinvention. Of course, there are many of us, me included, that hark back to the old days and want a continuation of the original Generation 1 Transformers, for example. But we're just getting nostalgic in our old age at that point, in my opinion. Let's not forget that these shows are primarily aimed to market a product, and that product's main financial contributor are our children. It's a new age where reduxing and reinvention is a must if a franchise is to survive. There are, of course, markets for the old school collectors. The famous Transformers convention, BotCon, is evidence of this, and having Peter Cullen in the movies, no matter what we think of them as Optimus Prime, is a wonderful nod to the old school. It's fair to say that the 80s doesn't really survive in the 21st century as it does in spirit. And yet, it would be folly of us not to look back and appreciate what started the whole thing in the first place. As with Doctor Who, there will always be a division between the classic Who fans and the new Who fans. But we can take great comfort in the realisation that two generations separated by more than a mere decade can, for the first time, have something in common to relate to and talk about. And in that, I take great comfort. Long live the 80s. Well, in spirit anyway.